This decade may look like just fast-paced hockey and wild haircuts, but it completely changed the NHL forever, on and off the ice. The 1980s weren't just another chapter in hockey history. They were a turning point. From the very first puck drop in 1980, something felt different. Teams were faster, players were bolder, and the action on the ice? It was non-stop. The NHL wasn't just growing, it was exploding. At the start of the decade, the league already had powerhouses like the Montreal Canadiens and Philadelphia Flyers. But it was the New York Islanders who shocked everyone. In 1980, they weren't seen as favorites, but what followed was a 4-year run that turned them into legends. They didn't just win, they dominated. From 1980 to 1983, they won 4 straight Stanley Cups. And in 1984, they nearly got a 5th. Their captain, Denis Potvin, led with confidence. Billy Smith shut the door in net, and Mike Bossi, he made goal scoring look effortless. In just 10 seasons, Bossi had 9 50-goal years. No one had ever done that before. The Islanders weren't flashy, they were focused, and their run set the tone for the entire decade. While they were rising, other teams were trying to keep up. Rivalries grew fierce. The style of play was tough, gritty, and hard-hitting. Every game felt like a battle. Fans packed arenas, hungry for drama, passion, and pure hockey chaos. And just as the Islanders began to slow down, a new storm was building in the West. A storm led by a skinny kid from Brantford, Ontario. His name, Wayne Gretzky. But we'll get to that soon. If you love the old school hockey, wild goals, and the legends who built the game, stick around. Hit like, tap subscribe, and let's relive the greatest era the NHL has ever seen together. If the 1980s never happened the way they did, the NHL might have never become the global sport it is today. If the New York Islanders hadn't kicked off the decade with their 4 straight Stanley Cups, maybe hockey doesn't grab America's attention the way it did. And if Wayne Gretzky didn't come in like a storm and rewrite the record books, millions of kids might have never picked up a stick. Before the 80s, hockey was big, but it wasn't as everywhere. The US had teams, but Canada still held most of the heart and history. Then came the moments that changed everything. Gretzky scoring 92 goals in one season, Mario Lemieux entering the league and showing he was just as magical, massive fights that made headlines, teams like the Edmonton Oilers turning into dynasties. These weren't just games, they were moments that pulled people in. The NHL grew in size, in speed, and in popularity. New fans started watching, TV deals expanded, teams began landing in non-traditional markets. And without the wild drama, the tough rivalries, and the superstar performances of the 1980s, none of that might have happened. The league could have stayed small, it could have been a niche sport, but instead the 80s gave us chaos, characters, and careers that still shape the NHL today. Everything that came after, the 90s expansion, international tournaments, modern-day superstars, it all traces back to what happened in that unforgettable decade. In the early 1980s, one team took control of the NHL and refused to let go, the New York Islanders. They didn't just win, they built one of the most impressive dynasties in hockey history. It started in the 1979-80 season. The Islanders had been a good team in the late 70s, but they couldn't get over the hump. That all changed when they brought in a few key pieces, most notably Butch Goring. He wasn't the flashiest player, but he was the missing link. From that moment on, the Islanders became unbeatable when it mattered most. In 1980, they won their first Stanley Cup by beating the Philadelphia Flyers in 6 games. That win wasn't just a championship, it was the start of something much bigger. Over the next 3 years, the Islanders repeated as champions. And in 1983, they completed the four-peat, 4 straight Stanley Cups, a record that hasn't been matched since in the modern era. Their playoff dominance was unreal. Between 1980 and 1984, the Islanders won 19 straight playoff series. That's the longest playoff win streak in NHL history. No team, not even the legendary Oilers of the mid-80s, has ever done that. They weren't a one-man show either. Mike Bossi was their goal-scoring machine. He had 9 straight seasons with at least 50 goals, which is still an NHL record. Brian Trottier controlled the center of the ice with smarts and toughness. Denis Potvin anchored the defense and led like a champion. And Billy Smith? He was the playoff goalie no one wanted to face. Fiery, fearless, and unbeatable when the game was on the line. But it wasn't just talent that made the Islanders special. It was how they played as a team. They were disciplined, physical, and always ready to sacrifice. Blocked shots, gritty goals, hard back checks. Every player bought in. That's why they won. Their run came to an end in 1984, when a new dynasty, the Edmonton Oilers, finally knocked them off. But by then, the Islanders had made their mark. 4 cups, 19 playoff series wins, and a legacy that still gets talked about today. What they did in the early 80s didn't just set records, it set a standard. They showed what it meant to build a team from the ground up, keep it together, and win through chemistry, not just star power. The Islanders may not always get the spotlight, but their dynasty was the perfect way to start the most exciting decade in NHL history. While the Islanders ruled the early part of the decade, something special was building out west. A young team called the Edmonton Oilers, led by a skinny kid with unmatched vision, was about to change everything. His name, Wayne Gretzky. And by the time the 80s were over, he wasn't just a star, he was the great one. Gretzky joined the NHL in 1979 when the Oilers became part of the league after the WHA merged. At first, people thought he might be too small, too skinny, or just not tough enough to survive in the NHL. But he didn't just survive, he took over. In his very first NHL season, Gretzky tied for the league lead in points. And then, he just kept going. In the 1981-82 season, Gretzky did the unthinkable. He scored 92 goals and finished with 212 points. No one had ever hit 200 points in a season before, and he would go on to do it 3 more times. The numbers sound made up, but they're real. He wasn't the fastest or the strongest, but Gretzky saw the game like no one else. He knew where the puck was going before anyone else did. But this wasn't just about one man. The Oilers built a powerhouse around him. Mark Messier brought the fire and leadership. Jari Kurri became Gretzky's perfect scoring partner. Paul Coffey flew down the ice like a forward, even though he was a defenseman, and Grant Fuhr was the rockin' net when the team needed a big save. They played a different kind of hockey. Fast, creative, fearless. They didn't just beat teams, they overwhelmed them. While other teams focused on defense, the Oilers played offense like a storm, and fans couldn't get enough of it. After falling short a couple of times, the Oilers finally broke through in 1984. They defeated the Islanders, the very dynasty that had set the bar, and took the Stanley Cup. That moment felt like a passing of the torch. The Islanders were the champions of the early decade. The Oilers were now the kings of the NHL. From 1984 to 1990, the Oilers won 5 Stanley Cups in 7 years. 4 of those came with Gretzky. Their 1985 and 1987 squads are still considered some of the best teams ever assembled. Wayne Gretzky finished the decade with nearly every major scoring record, but his biggest achievement was how he changed the game. Kids wanted to be like him. Teams wanted to play like the Oilers. And the NHL, it went from a hard-hitting league to one where speed, skill, and creativity finally got their shine. The Oilers didn't just win. They inspired a new generation of hockey. And it all started with a kid who proved that you didn't need size to be the greatest, just unmatched heart and vision. As the 1980s rolled on, it wasn't just about the teams and the stars. The league itself started to evolve. The NHL was changing its rules, expanding its reach, and slowly building a new identity. And with those changes came a game that was faster, louder, and a whole lot flashier. One of the first big changes came in how the game was played. The league wanted more scoring, more speed, and more excitement. To help with that, they made small but important rule adjustments. Things like cracking down on stick fouls, reducing the size of goalie equipment, and adjusting offside rules. All of it was done to keep the game moving and bring more goals to the scoreboard, and it worked. Scoring in the 80s exploded. Teams weren't just trying to win, they were trying to outgun each other. It wasn't unusual to see games with 8 or even 10 goals total. Fans loved it. Broadcasters loved it. And for the first time, the NHL started feeling more like a show, not just a sport. Then came the expansion. The NHL wanted to grow its footprint across North America. In 1979, they brought in 4 teams from the WHA, including the Oilers, Jets, Nordiques, and Whalers. But during the 80s, they weren't done. The league worked hard behind the scenes to reach new markets, grow TV deals, and set the stage for future franchises in the cities like San Jose and Tampa Bay. Hockey wasn't just a Canadian and Northern US sport anymore. It was slowly moving south and west. And at the same time, the game itself was getting a little more wild. Players weren't just skilled, they were bold. The 80s saw the rise of enforcers, huge open ice hits, and massive bench clearing brawls. Fights became a normal part of the game. Teams used them to send messages or shift momentum. Guys like Bob Probert and Marty McSorley were feared just as much as they were respected. Off the ice, hockey was getting a makeover too. Players were growing their hair long, wearing tinted visors, taping their sticks in strange colors, and celebrating goals with style. The culture of the game was becoming more expressive. Some hated it, most loved it. Either way, it made hockey more entertaining than ever. The 1980s were the first time the NHL felt like it wasn't just a sport, it was a product, a show, a spectacle. And all of these changes, rules, expansion, attitude, they helped shape the league into what it is today. The NHL became more aggressive, more open, and a way more fun to watch. And once the league leaned into that energy, there was no turning back. The 1980s gave us some of the wildest, most unforgettable playoff moments in NHL history. Every spring, the stakes got higher, the hits got harder, and legends were made shift by shift. If you wanted drama, intensity, and last-second goals, you got it all. Let's start with the New York Islanders. Their 4 straight cups weren't just wins, they were wars. In 1980, they beat the Flyers in the overtime of Game 6 to seal their first championship. Bob Nystrom scored the game winner, and it instantly became one of the most iconic goals in playoff history. That moment kicked off the dynasty, and the pressure never let up after that. Then came the battles between the Islanders and the Oilers. In 1983, Edmonton reached the finals with a young, hungry team led by Wayne Gretzky. But the Islanders, still in their prime, swept them in 4 straight. It was a message: you're good, but not yet. But in 1984, the Oilers came back stronger. They faced the Islanders again, and this time, Edmonton won. That series felt like the passing of the torch. From there, the Oilers made the playoffs a playground, and in 1985 and 1987, they faced the Philadelphia Flyers in 2 epic finals. Both teams were fast, aggressive, and full of stars. In '87, it all came down to Game 7. The Oilers won, but not without a fight. Ron Hextall, the Flyers goalie, even won the Conn Smythe Trophy as playoff MVP, even though he lost. That's how good he was. But it wasn't just about the Oilers and Islanders. The Flames and Oilers had one of the most heated rivalries of the decade. Known as the Battle of Alberta, every playoff series between them felt like a street fight. In 1986, Calgary shocked everyone by knocking out Edmonton in the second round, thanks to an own goal by Steve Smith that still haunts Oilers fans to this day. That same year, the Canadiens made a surprise run to the Stanley Cup. With a rookie goalie named Patrick Roy leading the way, Montreal stunned the hockey world and won it all. Waugh's performance in overtime games became legendary, calm, clutch, and unbreakable. Then in 1989, Calgary finally reached the top. They beat Montreal in 6 games and lifted their first and only Stanley Cup. That made them the first team ever to win the Cup by defeating the Canadiens in Montreal, a fitting end to a decade full of bold moments. The 80s playoffs had everything: rivalries, revenge, heartbreak, and heroes. Every round felt like a war. Every goal meant everything. And for fans watching at home, it was edge-of-your-seat hockey like never before. The 1980s didn't just change the way hockey was played. It changed how it looked and felt. This was the decade when NHL players turned into rock stars. On the ice, they were scoring machines. Off the ice, they were becoming style icons. And fans couldn't get enough. Well, let's talk about the hair. Hockey hair in the 80s was a thing of beauty. The mullet became the unofficial hairstyle of the NHL. Short in the front, party in the back. It wasn't just a haircut, it was a statement. Players like Ron Duguay wore it proudly, and soon, so did kids in the stands. That wild flow became part of hockey's identity, and to this day, it's remembered as the ultimate retro look. But it didn't stop there. Players started showing more personality. Taped up sticks and crazy colors, tinted visors, flashy skates. Style was now part of the game. Even the gear started to evolve. Goalie masks became more personalized with detailed paint jobs showing off everything from team logos to fierce animals. It was art on the ice. Celebrations also got bigger. When a player scored in the 70s, it was a quick fist pump, maybe a nod to the bench. But in the 80s, guys went wild. Sticks raised in the air, arms flying, fans jumping. Every goal felt like a concert moment. Guys like Tiger Williams were sliding across the ice on their knees. The energy was electric. The NHL also started to show up more in the media. TV broadcasts improved. Highlights were shown more often. And for the first time, hockey players became known outside of just sports. Wayne Gretzky was everywhere. Commercials, interviews, even talk shows. Kids didn't just want to watch him, they wanted to be him. Trading cards exploded in popularity. So did posters. And magazines were filled with stories not just about the games, but the players' lives. What they wore, where they lived, who they were dating, it all became part of the hockey world. Some players leaned into that fame, others just kept their heads down and played, but together, they gave the league a new vibe. It wasn't just about toughness anymore. It was about style, confidence, and being larger than life. The 1980s made hockey cool. It brought flair to a sport known for grit. It mixed heart with swagger. And it gave fans more than just goals and saves. It gave them heroes they could look up to, and moments they'd never forget. As the 1980s came to a close, the NHL began to feel a shift. The fast pace, the wild scoring, the big personalities, they were all still there. But something else was happening too. The legends who had ruled the ice all decade long were starting to slow down. And in their place, a new wave of stars was just getting started. Wayne Gretzky was still playing at an elite level, but by the late 80s, his time in Edmonton was coming to an end. In 1988, in one of the most shocking moments in NHL history, he was traded to the Los Angeles Kings. The deal broke hearts in Canada, but it also changed the league forever. Gretzky's move brought hockey into Hollywood and opened the door for the NHL to grow in the US like never before. At the same time, Players like Mike Bossi and Dennis Potvin had already retired, while others like Guy Lafleur and Marcel Dion were nearing the end. These were the names fans had cheered for since the late 70s. They had carried the game through one of its most exciting decades, but the torch was ready to be passed. And the 90s were more than ready to take it. Mario Lemieux had already shown he was more than just the next big name. He was a once-in-a-generation talent. His skill, size, and calm under pressure made him unstoppable. In the final years of the 80s, Mario was already scoring at a pace that even Gretzky had to respect. Then there was Patrick Roy, who had turned a surprise Stanley Cup run into a career full of greatness. Brett Hull was becoming one of the game's best goal scorers. And other young names, like Joe Sakic, Jeremy Roenick, and Steve Yzerman, were beginning to step into bigger roles. Teams were changing too. The old dynasties were fading, and the playoff picture started to look different every year. The Oilers still had enough to win another cup in 1990, but the writing was on the wall. The league was entering a new era, and as the final whistle blew on the 1989 season, fans could feel it. The 1980s had given them non-stop action, unforgettable players, and some of the greatest hockey ever played. But now, it was time to turn the page. The stars of the 80s had done their part. They built the league, raised the bar, and changed the game forever. And as they handed off the spotlight to a new generation, they left behind more than just records. They left behind a legacy. For all the greatness the 1980s gave hockey, it also gave us moments of deep sadness. Moments that reminded everyone just how fragile the game and life itself can be. This was a decade filled with speed, skill, and passion. But with that came risk. The NHL in the 80s was intense. Players gave everything they had, every shift, every game. And sometimes it came at a heavy cost. One of the most heartbreaking moments happened in 1986, when the hockey world lost a rising star far too soon. George Palawa, a first-round draft pick for the Calgary Flames, died in a car crash just months after being selected. He was only 18 years old. Many believed he had the size and talent to become a dominant power forward, but he never got the chance to step onto NHL ice. Then came the tragic loss of Pelle Lindbergh, the star goalie of the Philadelphia Flyers. In 1985, after winning the Vezina Trophy just one season earlier, Lindbergh died in a car accident. He was only 26. His death left the Flyers and the entire league in shock. Teammates, fans, and even opponents mourned him. He had the potential to become one of the greatest goalies of his generation, but that future was suddenly gone. The 80s also saw careers end due to injuries that today might have been preventable. Mike Bossi, one of the most gifted goal scorers the league has ever seen, had to retire early because of chronic back problems. He scored over 50 goals in 9 straight seasons, a record that still stands. But his career ended at just 30 years old. The pain was too much, and despite his love for the game, his body gave out before his talent ever did. Another quiet heartbreak was the toll the game took on players after they left the ice. Many who were fan favorites in the 80s dealt with serious health issues later, both physical and mental. The grind of the game, the hits, the fights, they all left marks that didn't always heal. And behind the scenes, the pressure to stay in the lineup, to fight through injuries, to never show weakness, it weighed heavily on many players. They were heroes on the ice, but human underneath the gear. The 1980s gave us legends, but it also reminded us that greatness often comes with sacrifice. And while we celebrate the goals, the wins, and the glory, we also remember the lives that were cut short and the careers that ended too soon. These stories deserve to be told, because they're part of hockey's history too. Watching the NHL in the 1980s now isn't just about the numbers or the trophies. It's about everything those players gave to the game. The moments, the sacrifice, the legacy. This was a time when hockey wasn't polished. It was raw, fast, and full of fire. The rules were looser, the hits were harder, and the players, they played with heart that couldn't be taught. Every goal, every save, every fight, it meant something. The 80s gave us dynasties like the Islanders and Oilers. It gave us Gretzky's genius, Lemieux's rise, and Patrick Roy's poise. It gave us game winners in overtime, rivalries that felt personal, and a passion that jumped right through the screen. But more than that, it gave us identity. This decade helped turn hockey from just a sport into a global culture. The hair, the gear, the celebrations, it all became part of the magic. Players weren't just athletes. They were icons. Kids didn't just want to play hockey, they wanted to be those guys. Even now, decades later, the 80s still feel different, still feel special. Maybe it's the wild pace. Maybe it's the unforgettable moments. Or maybe it's because it was the last time the game felt that raw, that unpredictable. Whatever it is, one thing's clear. The 1980s weren't just a chapter in NHL history. They were the heartbeat of it. A golden age. A time when legends were made and the sport became something bigger than anyone expected. And the best part, that legacy still lives on today every time the puck drops. If this video brought back memories or helped you see the magic of the 1980s in a new way, don't forget to like and subscribe.